very much. So next up, we've got Shweta Sharma. Have I said your name right?
Yes, perfect.
Oh, nailed it. Not bad for a northerner, that. She's going to talk about AI, of course, but also how to rewire workplaces using that AI knowledge.
I think an important word in what you said, Simone, was sustainability. And there's been a lot of emotions around sustainability that some of our speakers kind of talked about, and the risks. I'm here to sort of infuse a bit of positivity, so I would please request a bit of grace from our hardened operation leaders in the audience today. We are really excited, and exciting is probably an understatement, because when we sort of think about reimagining sustainability in the context of commercial real estate, it's really sort of people in this room and in the audience today that are actually going to make that change and are actually going to lead that transformation. And I sort of realized that in this conference back in 2024, last year, we sort of discussed this point. And I think it was a presentation by Laura Ansari and Brad Taylor, who kind of talked about the evolution of roles in the workplace in this AI-enabled world. And we think that that's actually quite critical to the conversation around sustainability. Let's understand why. And I know a lot of people today talked about the focus on the problem statement. And so I want to take a step back before we go into the AI world to actually see what's happening on ground and what are the FM teams experiencing on a daily basis. So we have these amazing, incredible buildings, right, that are the lifeline of economic activity, and there's a really cool, video here, which will probably pause at some point. But effectively, what we're thinking about is, wow, there's so much activity across offices, shops, restaurants, all of that kind of being driven by these sort of skylines in big cities and towns that we live in. And then what people in regular life don't really notice is what is quite familiar to all the members of the audience here today. Massive inefficiencies, right? Lights are being switched on, HVAC systems are being overrun. There's so much to take care of that we're constantly reacting on what's happening at the building level, at the site level. And guess what? Who's at the front line? It's us. It's these people in the audience today. Now, let's understand what's happening in the market when we talk about sustainability and ESG. There's evolving regulation that's constantly changing, announcements coming out. Different government and administrations are taking different decisions on what goals should be. We're being bombarded with data sets, and we talked a lot about data today, around sort of the disparate systems and the sources. Basically, everything is kind of hitting our facility management teams on ground in a way that we're effectively ending up being reactive and trying to problem solve. But it's kind of like the tooling that we have is sort of still kind of embedded in spreadsheets. And I loved Andrew's kind of diagram in the morning about the whole kind of ecosystem of technology being propped up by an Excel sheet, right? But that's the reality of life. It's kind of like our jobs are becoming so complex, and we're supposed to be doing all these incredible things, but actually the tooling that we have is just not moving. So, I mean, we're working hard, we're working faster, but are we making impact? Probably not. I mean, that's very rightly kind of pointed out by the ISS group, right? And so, if you kind of take a compassionate lens on sort of why that's happening, it's exactly this problem where, Simone, you put up a lot of dots in your morning presentation, right? Actually, what's happening is that today, as we see it, the job of an FM manager, I mean, it is complex, it is challenging. So we can stand here on stage the entire day, talk about how we need to focus on the right use case and make investments and be more strategic. But try telling that to a person who's having to react to 500 problems on ground. Boilers broken, tenants are shouting because something is not working from a comfort standpoint. I mean, really, are we really sort of paying them enough to actually go through that? Of course we're not going to have any impact, right? And so, to my mind, actually, if we want to think about AI, it's about how am I going to make that FM person's job easier on a daily basis so that they can finish up work, be productive, go back home and enjoy dinner with family, right? hopefully that should sort of give you some context. And we see it every day with our teams, right? That's the reality that we live in today. And we have to do a lot of things. And people talked about optimizing tenant experience, great design, right? Making sure that we are focusing on aggregation of data into insights. Oh, by the way, we have to do all of this really cheaply and cost effectively, right? So that we're not breaking the bank for our customers. So the reality that we live in is basically these bunch of dots that are hitting us, right? And so at CBRE, we sort of kind of take a step back and we said, right, AI is awesome, this is incredible, we want to drive sustainability outcomes for ourselves and for our clients, but we're going to start with the problem statement. And the problem statement is really about how do you effectively simplify this ecosystem? How do you make sure that the FM teams on ground, which are quite frankly the unsung heroes of sustainability within commercial real estate, I mean, how do you effectively have them integrate the information that is being kind of produced at an unprecedented level, build those connections, integrate the programs in a way that drive outcomes at scale for our clients, right? That's how you essentially build those incremental wins on a daily basis. So that's hopefully context for the problem statement, right? Now, what does that mean tactically? I'm going to talk about data now, right? So now we've sort of like laid out the law of the land. What does it mean when we say driving sustainability programs at scale needs to be done using the ecosystem of data and analytics that sort of bombard us on a daily basis? Well, what we need to do is we need to look at sensors, right? Like that was the joke of the session previously. We need to actually look at the information from sensors, but we need to layer that with weather conditions expected over the next week. We need to then look at basically the climate risk resilience of that particular asset and where we are located. Is it close to water? And then we need to look at basically how is the workplace kind of operating from an occupancy standpoint, right? Now, you may argue that, fine, we've been doing that forever. I mean, we have teams that have been doing that. But actually, it's quite reactive, and it's so manual because, again, back to the spreadsheets. We're trying to consolidate that data. We're trying to create like outputs and recommendations that will sort of recommend operational decisions. But guess what? We're sort of constantly kind of lagging behind, hence the reaction. Well, we believe that actually, if you kind of think about AI and its applications, we can actually change that with the way where AI is developing today. And some of the speakers talked about generative AI. We actually see that the whole manual effort that we're observing in sort of getting these outputs are kind of bucketed into 3 categories. And that's how we are very, very focused. We're very focused on effectively how we're sort of like actually driving impact across these specific buckets of work. We talked about all the data that is kind of floating around in the building, right? Now, here's the thing. In AI that we sort of position or imagine today, we can actually make the work of actually aggregating outputs from building management systems, occupancy sensors, those 1,500 sensors that are constantly being installed, more cheaply and more effectively, so that you don't actually have to grapple with the disastrous technology stack integrations that kind of plague us all the time, right? And they are a real sort of barrier to adoption. And so you might argue again that, hey, we already have those dashboards, right? Like Andy spoke about Tableau and Power BI and how that kind of like surfaces up like unified data views. But what he also said is quite right. Come back to the facility manager. You expect them to sit for 2 hours a day trying to look at that data and make sense out of it when people are shouting on the phone to them and they're like constantly running across the building. Hell no. That is not the reality. So imagine if they could actually take their phone out and have a AI agent that can talk to them. Hey, here's what's happening in your building. Here's what the data says. I think you should go and check that HVAC system. What do you think? Do you want me to take any action? Okay, I could deal with that. I could talk to you for a bit. on my own time, when I need it, when I can catch a breath. That's the power of how we're effectively like changing the way monitoring happens in a building. People talked about optimization. Now we've been kind of looking at examples of capital planning and sort of looking at how you make decisions around energy optimization, right? Again, not something that we haven't done previously, but with AI, now we have tooling that can allow us to simulate very accurately and very quickly net zero glide paths that can inform when is that next retrofit going to be most cost effective and is going to basically be helpful in building the business case or the investment case for the CapEx planning process, right? So what we've now done is that we've taken that manual effort that was anyway happening, by the way, because our facility managers are great and they have data teams and they can kind of run that anyway. But what we're doing is that we're sort of quickly changing that approach to make it more efficient and effective so that you're actually spending more time convincing the landlords or the investors and actually making that decision. Automation, back to the complexity dots, right? We've been talking about automation as an industry for like decades. But what's happened is that with AI, we are observing with our clients is that actually you can take this complexity and now automate some really, really complex tasks that was previously not possible. I'll give you an example. In sustainability, compliance is sort of top of mind for a lot of our clients. And by compliance, I mean how do you essentially crank out reporting around GRED submissions or TCFD, SFRD, you name it. Typically, that is manual hours that goes in sort of cleaning the data, putting that together, making sure that the insights make sense so that we can ultimately generate reports that are actually going to fetch big scores for our investor clients, ultimately, who are the owners of the asset, and we can drive like massive returns in terms of access to capital. Imagine the opportunity where we actually take away that manual scrub of data, improve data accuracy, so now you're actually spending more time thinking about the insights and the strategy that actually goes behind those reports. And that is effectively where we see AI having an instrumental part in the way we're actually transforming that business process, so to speak. So that's one area that we're quite excited about, and we see that a lot of engagement from our clients in sort of helping us work through some of that. The reason why FM is so crucial for this, somebody else said it in the previous presentations, is that we own the data. We basically are the custodians of that data. And without that data, McKinsey, Deloitte, PwC, none of those, and if there are members of those groups in the audience today, I'm sure you'll agree when I say that we're actually looking to our operations teams to actually fetch that information. So what is stopping us from actually being more deliberate in the way we're actually imagining the opportunities with that data ourselves? Now, that's sort of like the buckets in which we kind of break down work or scopes of sustainability across FM. But there's another layer to it, which is typically around the traditional barriers that we've always noticed in sort of technology adoption in our sector. And these are sort of themes that have been picked up like through the day today, but effectively the first one is like, oh my goodness, the amount of systems and the technology stacks that we have to actually integrate to actually make sense of the data that is available, that's insane. But we can actually simplify that process, and we're doing that today actively. So this is not something that we'll do in the future. We have done that for a lot of our clients in the way we use generative AI to actually bring together these sources. We talked about business processes. Back to the FM manager, the poor FM manager who's sort of saddled with all these responsibilities. You're now offering up opportunities for her to actually talk to an AI agent. We're entering the world of agentic AI now, and have a conversation about what's going on in the building rather than spending like hours in front of dashboards that frankly are time consuming in the rigmarole of like day-to-day operations management, right? And then the third one, finally, is effectively something that's usually a conundrum, the dilemma between what is the owner's expectations versus what is the occupier's expectations. we are effectively in the world today where we're being able to create common ground through the work that AI can do in sort of pulling data together to make sure that actually both parties can come and have a very productive conversation about how their sustainability aspirations can kind of come together. And so that can translate to some really, really meaningful outcomes. We've been using this from across our client sets and trialing this, where we have actually surfaced up information that is relevant for both parties to be able to have conversations around who is going to make that investment in retrofits? When is that going to happen, depending on the lease breaks? And then how do we effectively restructure the lease arrangements that are currently ongoing to incorporate things like green leasing frameworks? All of these hopefully give you a bit of idea around tactical outcomes that can be driven when you kind of focus narrowly on the problem statement, which in my case is sustainability, and how do we effectively reimagine sustainability in the world of commercial real estate. And I'll sort of leave you with this, where we came back right to the beginning, right? We're talking about the FM manager and the job to be done, right? And so in the future, the way we look at AI is not necessarily the focus on like these amazing AI agents, but it's basically the transformation of a tactical executor to somebody who is a strategic enabler. Because without the support of the operation teams on ground, there is no chance in hell that we're actually going to be hitting any of those commitments that have been made at a corporate level, right? And so, you can see basically the need for action because, as the ISS team pointed out, there is this trail of AI-induced emissions that are essentially creeping up. Forget about the inefficiencies that are building, right? And we need to really, really take responsibility in the way we actually drive that down, particularly within the built environment, because it's a high-impact area. But we cannot do that if our FM teams are not on board and frontline in terms of these efforts in engaging with AI. And so I'll leave you with just one question. What is the role that you're going to play as we go through this transformation, right? How are you going to talk to your teams about what needs to happen on a daily basis for you to actually effect change? Because the buildings of tomorrow are not waiting for some AI agent to take action. They're waiting for you. Thank you.